It was a huge week for AI filmmaking. Voice dubbing and art direction will never be the same, and we have begun to see some of the types of technological breakthroughs that will change the world of VFX forever. Welcome to AI Film News. We're going to kick things off this week by talking about Adobe. Every year, Adobe has their Adobe Max conference out here in Los Angeles, and this year did not disappoint. Now, they featured many new technological innovations like a dress that you can change the design of using a computer, which is interesting, but we're going to talk about specifically the tools and techniques that we think will be helpful for filmmakers. So let's get to it. So the first big announcement comes from Adobe Firefly, which is essentially their AI generation model that creates AI imagery. Adobe's AI-generated imagery is really enticing because it is copyright cleared and you can use it in commercial projects, unlike projects created in tools like Midjourney or Dollie, where the legality of using that imagery is a little questionable at this point for corporations. So let's take a look at using this new Firefly model. So to use the new Firefly model, just go to Firefly's website. You'll find a link below this video and click Get Firefly Free. And now we'll do text to image. So we'll kick things off by typing in a prompt. I'm gonna say a cinematic still of a man in a sci-fi film. So right off the bat, you can see that the images look pretty interesting. If we click in, we can see them larger and they look pretty realistic. I would say they look a lot more editorial than classically cinematic. But they do look very interesting, and one of the things I love about Firefly is there's actually diversity in here. Typically, when you use tools like Midjourney, it'll just give you white people all the time, and so you have to prompt specifically for diversity. Firefly seems to be doing a great job at introducing diversity into the first round of images that you get. Now, the thing that makes Firefly so interesting is their editorial panel on the right. So we've already had the ability to update things like the aspect ratio and to hone in certain effects and things like that. But Firefly 2 has taken it one step further. So down here, you can, of course, change the color and tone, you can change the lighting style, but you can also change the composition. And this is really interesting because one of the challenges when you're working with AI tools is to actually adjust the composition. So now we can literally say, we want this shot to happen from below, and we can hit generate. And you can see that all of these generated images are happening now from below. Now, I'm not sure that I would say that these are in a sci-fi film per se, but they are at least visually interesting. You can also go in and adjust the photo settings, which I think is really helpful. So by default, it's set to automatic, but we can turn that off and actually begin to adjust some of the camera settings like the aperture, like the shutter speed, and like the field of view. So for our instance here, I'm going to change this to f16, so we want to see more things in focus. We'll change the shutter speed. You can't do 1/50, so we'll do 1/60, which will be as close as we can get to a typical cinematic shutter speed whenever you're doing 1/24. Ideally, it would be 48, but typically with DSLRs and things like that, you can only do 50. But we'll do 60 in this instance, and you can also change the field of view. I'm gonna push this to 20 millimeters because it is actually typically very challenging to get a good wide shot using AI tools. So let's go ahead and see what we get from Firefly. Okay, this looks pretty good. And you can see that it actually connected it to the seed as well, rather than generating an entirely new visual style, which could be helpful for iterating. So it's interesting that Adobe's taking that approach and Midjourney's taking an approach where they give you completely new images each time, unless you, of course, reprompt a variant. So you can also adjust things like lighting. I'll just quickly demo this. We'll say dramatic light, and you can change the color and tone. For this one, we'll say that we want to have a toned image. So let's go ahead and hit generate. Okay, so as you can see, as we begin to add in more visual cues, the image starts to break down. If I kind of scale this one up, this guy looks like a zombie. He looks like he has makeup on, and then also like he's wearing like Halloween makeup. This image is really starting to break down, and a lot of these are really losing a lot of that realism. So as you begin to add in effects and things like that, the images start to break down. I should also note that Firefly doesn't have the ability to do repeaters, so you won't be able to adjust a slider or type in a code and get a ton of new iterations, which I feel like is part of the value of working with AI tools, is that quick directorial velocity. So that is at least one limitation that you do have inside of Firefly at the moment. You also have the ability to type in negative prompts, and we can say, in this instance, no suits, and we can regenerate the scene. So now we can see it has produced a brand new image and nobody is wearing a suit. Now, I wouldn't say that most of these images are cinematic. I would say they're more editorial. And when we're talking about cinematic at Curious Refuge, we simply mean a visual quality that emulates the lens and camera styles reminiscent of those shot typically out here in Hollywood. But every image could hypothetically be cinematic if you used it in a film project. They've also introduced generative fill directly in Adobe Firefly, which is really helpful. So let's say that we like this image here. All you have to do is go to Edit and go to Generative Fill. So now we can begin to art direct this scene a little further. So let's say that we want to change the end of this cone here. Well, you can just go to Remove, and then we'll just paint out the end of this cone and click Remove. And you can see that it gave us a result that looks pretty realistic. So we'll go ahead and keep that. You can also insert certain things into your frame. So I like that these are like some sort of like airport tower or something like that. Let's add another one. So I'm going to paint in up here. We'll just test out this technology to see how good it is. So paint that in, and we'll say an airport control tower and generate. Okay, so you can see it gave us a few different towers. They look, I guess, fairly realistic. I don't think that this would be structurally sound, but it is interesting. And of course, you can keep generating more if you wanted to. Lastly, you have the ability to separate your subject from the background and generate an entirely new background based on the lighting on your character. So I'll go to background here, and now it cut out our subject from the background. You can see how good it did at cutting out the character's hair. And we can generate something completely new. So I can say a man in an ice cream shop. And let's see what it gives us. So you can see that it put him inside of this ice cream shop. Obviously, some of these don't look super realistic, and I would say that it has very traditional filmic qualities to it. So it's definitely interesting and worth checking out. Now, you're probably wondering how Firefly 2 compares to Midjourney, and I did a side-by-side comparison. This image here is created by Firefly. You can see that it looks pretty good. It's a cinematic still of a man in a sci-fi film. They look pretty interesting. Now, again, they're very, very editorial. So they embody more that stock photo, that magazine quality, lighting and imagery, but it does look fairly interesting. And I think you could iterate to get a result that looks fairly cinematic. Now, this image on the right was created by Midjourney, and you can see it's in a completely different league. It is incredible. The artwork is very, very creative, and I think Midjourney really knocked it out of the park. And of course, in Midjourney, you have repeater tags where you can generate more artwork than you could inside Adobe Firefly. So all in all, I'd say Midjourney is a much better tool for creating imagery at the moment. Adobe also announced a generative match feature, which essentially allows you to upload your own reference images and generate them inside of the tool. So I'm going to drop this image into Firefly, see if it can create an image that is of similar quality and composition. Okay, let's take a look at the results. So I think it did a pretty good job of referencing the image that I uploaded. It has kind of the same bokeh qualities. The face is not as realistic, especially as you zoom in. It begins to look like it has almost like a plastic quality to it, but it does look a little more like the uploaded reference images. And especially because I didn't even prompt in that I wanted snow or out of focus bokeh or anything like that. I think it did a pretty good job. Adobe also announced a brand new text to vector image model that essentially allows you to type in text inside Adobe Illustrator and get vector graphics in return. It's one of the first tools in the world that has unleashed this technology, and it seems very promising for graphic designers. They also released a brand new text to graphic design template technology inside of Adobe Express, and it does look kind of interesting. I'll show you how to use it real quick. Basically, you just go to the Adobe Express website, click on the button to sign in, scroll down, go to text to template, and you just type in what you want to see. In our instance, I'll say a poster for a sci-fi film with aliens. So as you can see, the posters right now are not very good, but obviously the technology will get better in the future. And if we compare the exact same prompt inside of Canva using their new AI graphic design tool, You can see that the quality of the posters we get from Canva are terrible compared to Adobe. So in most graphic design instances at this point, I'd say it's better to use a traditional pipeline rather than relying on these tools. Just like Canva, they also released the ability to translate Adobe Express graphic design files into over 45 different languages. It's obviously very helpful if you're working on a pitch deck or anything else that needs to be translated, because you can do it directly inside of the tool. They also released quite a few new sneaks at their event. Now, if you're not familiar with sneaks, these are essentially technological experiments and showcases that may find their way into Adobe tools. In the past, it was maybe less than 50% of them actually ended up being inside of the technology, but because AI is so competitive this year, I imagine that we'll see quite a few of these inside of their tools in the very near future. So let's start with the first one that has been getting all of the press, Adobe Fast Fill. Essentially, Fast Fill is like a Mocha tracker inside of After Effects, but it allows you to do in-painting inside of video. All you have to do is select the area that you want to replace, and you can essentially change the objects inside of your video frame. The results seemed really interesting, and I think this has huge implications for the VFX industry. Soon, in-painting for video will be the norm, and instead of doing traditional matte painting, artists will be able to simply select a frame and say what visual element they want to see. If you want to see a building on fire, you just circle the building, type in fire, and now it's on fire. If you want to see a lightning strike, you just draw in the frame, type in lightning strike, and then it happens. So I think that's going to have huge implications for the future of the visual effects industry. They also announced an interesting upscaling tool that essentially converts GIFs or videos into higher res formats. Seems like this is very similar to Topaz Video, but Adobe's does seem like it generates a little bit higher quality from the uploaded assets. They also announced a dubbing tool that essentially allows you to upload audio or video and it will automatically dub it into a foreign language. But we have an interesting announcement about this technology a little bit later in the video. There's also Adobe Scene Change, which essentially allows you to change the background of your shot automatically. So similar to that Firefly demo that I showed you earlier, where we selected our subject, changed the background, you'll be able to do that with video with motion in the background. So obviously that has huge implications for the future of green screen compositing. They also announced a new symbol that they are hoping to adopt alongside Bing that can be used to mark when content was created using artificial intelligence. Now, the extent to which you should use the symbol inside of your piece and the degree in which an image would be considered artificial intelligence versus real world and modified with artificial intelligence is still anyone's guess, but it is an interesting move. They also announced this new feature that essentially allows you to draw a stick figure or a quick storyboard, and it creates an artistic result in return. So you don't have to be a world-class artist to generate a result that is in the same compositional style of what you're envisioning. Seems like this could have huge implications for the future, but I should note that you can use technology like this using tools like ControlNet with Stable Diffusion already. So it's an interesting tool, but already kind of possible at this point using other tools. They also announced Project Poseable, which allows you to pose a 3D model and essentially generate artwork and imagery from the poses that you are placing that model in. And finally, they announced a tool inside of Lightroom that allows you to remove all of the window reflections from your frame, which could be really helpful if you do documentary work or specifically have to shoot your subject through a window, but you don't want to have the crazy reflections. Okay, so those are the Adobe AI announcements that you should know about. Now, let's do some quick takeaways. Number one, Adobe Firefly is amazing, but it's not as good as Midjourney. So it has a fantastic interface, and I think it really showcases what a good generative AI workspace can be like, but unfortunately the results are just not quite there at this point. Adobe Express is slightly better than Canva, but it's still pretty bad, so I would say in most instances you probably want to avoid it. Adobe Fast Fill is a completely new tool, but again, it is not available just yet. Not only do I think this technology will be good for removing people from the background, but I think this is absolutely going to change the visual effects industry. The AI video upscaling tool is awesome, but you can use Topaz Video in place of that feature, so you immediately have access to a tool that does that. The scene change is really interesting, and I don't know of any other technology that is quite like that at this moment outside of literally taking your subject into a tool like Runway, removing the background, and then prompting in a completely new background. So that is going to be a very helpful tool inside of the future. Draw and Delight is really interesting, but you do have the ability to use this same technology using ControlNet with Stable Diffusion at this moment. It's a little technical, so it won't be quite as easy to use as Adobe's feature, but you can actually already begin to use that technology. Project Poseable is really interesting and I think showcases the future of using 3D assets inside of a filmmaking workflow. The line between gaming and filmmaking really is blurring. And the Project See-Through, I think, is an incredible tool that is helpful for images right now, but when the technology gets put into a video context, I think it will be very helpful as well. Woo! Okay, so that was the Adobe generative AI updates that you need to know. Let's step away from Adobe for a second before we come back to talking about some of the updates that they've put inside of their tools this week. Shelby will be speaking at the FYI campus this next week, talking about AI and the creator economy. There's still tickets available and you can join us on October 24th from 6 to 10 p.m. out here in Los Angeles. Elevenlabs also released a brand new dubbing tool that essentially allows you to upload a video and get it dubbed in a foreign language. Now the tool is super easy to use. All you have to do is go to the dubbing section of their website and click on create a new dub. We can title this test dub and you can let it detect your language, which is totally fine. You can also change the target language. They have a ton of different options to pick from here. I'll go ahead and select Portuguese. And you can either upload the YouTube URL directly inside of Elevenlabs, or you can upload the video yourself. And there are some advanced settings to define the number of speakers, the video resolution, and the exact range for the dubbing. So once you get done with that, all you have to do is click create and it will create a new video. Now I've had some mixed results at this point, but the tool does seem incredibly interesting. And this automatic dubbing feature really is the future of creative entertainment and changing the language that people actually consume your content. So let's go ahead and listen to this result that I generated for our AI horror competition.
Chez Octobre, Curious Refuge et Elevenlabs vous présente Halloween, un concours de films d'Halloween à mourir.
So you can see that it's pretty good and it even knows how to distinguish the background sound effects and the music from the actual voice. So this technology is really impressive and definitely worth testing out if you want to dub your videos in a different language. So let's go back to Adobe because they launched new features inside of Premiere Pro and After Effects that you need to know about. The first is inside of Premiere Pro, the timeline is now allegedly 5 times faster, which is awesome. But specifically, they have AI tools for converting the text that your subject speaks into actual text to where you can edit just the text alone inside Adobe Premiere Pro. It's very similar to using a tool like Descript, but it's directly inside of Premiere Pro. And hopping back over to Adobe After Effects, they also released a new AI rotoscoping tool that essentially will do a better job at getting the finer details around your subject using artificial intelligence, making the entire process of rotoscoping so much easier. I should also note that our AI filmmaking course for the November session will open up on October 25th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. It's only about 2 weeks away, so be sure to set your reminders. The video game CyberPunk 2077 used AI to bring back a voice actor who had perished. So the game developers reached out to the family and asked if it was okay to use the actor's likeness inside of the video game, and they were able to bring them back using AI technology. I think we'll see a lot more opportunities like this to work with actors and celebrities that have been deceased and bring them essentially back to life inside a film. I should also note that our AI horror competition is coming to a close on October 20th. Remember, you have until the 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific time to upload your submission and try to win those sweet, sweet prizes. I also want to shout out Steve Mills over on X, who basically showed that it's actually easier to get your subject's lips to move around the frame inside of Runway if you actually prompt for your subject talking. So obviously you don't have full control over the actual lips syncing up with the audio at this point using this specific use case, But it is pretty interesting, and I think that pretty soon you will be able to upload an audio file into these video generators and actually have the lips match in an interesting and a compelling way that looks realistic. This last week, Shelby at Curious Refuge also dropped what we think is the world's first AI documentary. So essentially, it tells the story of Milli Vanilli, and Shelby used her art directing skills and editing skills to take what AI was giving her and compile a really interesting film. So I definitely recommend checking that out. There's also big news this last week about artificial intelligence compared to human intelligence. So essentially, the CEO of SoftBank came out and said that AI will surpass human intelligence by the year 2030. That echoes what Elon said a few weeks ago, where he said AGI would essentially be here by the year 2029. And that echoes what Ray Kurzweil from Google said, which was by the year 2029, AI will essentially pass a real authoritative Turing test. And by 2045, AI will have intelligence that's 1 billion times bigger than our own. And that is when essentially our consciousness and artificial intelligence will begin to merge. So that gives us about 22 years. And on that light note, let's get to our AI films of the week. So sticking with our Halloween theme, Patricia over on X put together this really interesting stop motion skeleton style that kind of looks like an interesting stop motion Dia de los Muertos project. And I think she did a great job with curating the shots and creating an interesting vibe that I would love to see as an animated film. Our next project comes from Karan, who put together this quick AI film trailer called The Last Echo. Now, it seems to take place in kind of a war environment, and he did a really great job at curating the shots inside of the frame. So a lot of these shots seem really very realistic. Now, a few of these shots actually look like they may have outside third-party elements incorporated, but I can't tell 100%, which is kind of interesting. Beatrice also put together this short film that is a submission for our AI film competition called Dollie, and it takes place in this kind of Victorian era and has like a bunch of creepy dolls. And I think she did a really good job at incorporating her shot selection with the subjects actually speaking to the camera, and it looks really interesting. So good job, Beatrice. And for our student submission of the week, I want to shout out Nicholas, who put together this film trailer for Echoes of Lumina. And the trailer is really interesting. It incorporates third-party assets and has some interesting camera movement and great curation on the visuals. So fantastic job, Nicholas. And finally, I want to showcase this article from Forbes that breaks down the ways in which AI is empowering people with disabilities. It's a really interesting list where they go into everything from communication to learning opportunities that are available to people with the use of these technologies. Okay, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of AI Film News. Remember, you can subscribe over on Curious Refuge to get our weekly newsletter full of AI news that you need to know about. And of course, you can subscribe here to get AI film news each week. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.